Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Monday night edition of the Wolverine live show here on the Wolverines YouTube channel. Anthony Broom here, along with Clayton Safey, as we are every Monday night. Of course, Chris Ballas, usually with us, will not be on the show this week. Hope to get him back for the next time we're on, but a lot to get to today because Clayton, this week is what we discussed last week, almost like the unofficial start to the football season, like the first day of school. We'll be headed to Indiana on Wednesday for Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. It feels like we've been spending a lot more time than we're used to in Indy these last 2 years or so. So happy to get back there. We'll talk and run through, what we expect to learn, what we probably won't learn, some of the storylines coming into the event. I know Chris Jenkins, Mike Sainristil, Blake Corum, Jim Harbaugh will all be there on Thursday afternoon as part of Michigan's contingent representing the program there. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, Clayton, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for a road trip back down to Indy. Been there quite a few times over the last few years, as you mentioned. I was calculating it out last night. This will be my 9th time inside Lucas Oil Stadium in the last 2.5 years. So that means Michigan's had some success. That means I've had a lot of fun covering different teams between football and basketball. So it has been it's been exciting, and I am super pumped to get down there.
Absolutely. So we'll hit on all that. And as we do every week, towards the end of the program, we will take your questions. So those will come from the fort. I put the word out on Twitter. They'll also come from you guys here in the YouTube comments. So be sure to get yourselves lined up for that. And again, if you want to move yours to the front of the line, be sure to use that donate button below. So, but before we get into the show, I want to talk about our first sponsor of our Monday night podcast here. Is our friends over at Bird Dogs. We've been talking about Bird Dogs for a couple weeks now. Happy to have them on board as a sponsor of the show. Bird Dogs has stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way, way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And they use anti-stink and sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Thursday, when we go to Lucas Oil Stadium, we're going to be running around that building like madmen. And you bet your bottom we'll have the Bird Dogs on because we're going to need all of the cooling off we can get, so to speak. So, again, appreciate their sponsorship. You go to birddogs.com/Wolverine or enter promo code Wolverine for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/Wolverine or promo code Wolverine for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't be able to take these things off. I promise you that. Like I said, used mine on vacation, have used mine in the days since. They also sent me a longer pants for when it gets a little cooler outside. It's not quite that way yet in Michigan, but yeah, shout out to Bird Dogs. And again, go to birddogs.com/Wolverine or use promo code Wolverine for the free Yeti style tumbler. And I've been doing a lot of beverage consuming out of that as well. So shout out to Bird Dogs. Clayton, let's move now into our Big Ten Media Days preview. Again, the Media Days do start on Wednesday in Indianapolis. Michigan will have their contingent on hand Thursday, so we'll make the trek Wednesday and then get out there for Thursday and head home later Thursday night with a bevy of material to sift through. And a lot of guys. We'll get Jim Harbaugh twice. He'll speak for 10 minutes in that podium session that you'll see on Big Ten Network, and then we'll probably get him. I haven't seen the schedule yet, but usually for about at least a half hour in the breakoff session, which you'll be able to see that video, the full video here on the Wolverine.com's YouTube channel. So be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for that. You'll also see video from the players that we talked to, which is Chris Jenkins, Blake Corum, Mike Sainristil. So as we get into our preview, Clayton, it's going to be a content item that I believe you have coming this week. We'll start with what we expect to learn or things maybe we have questions about that we know these guys might actually give us a little insight on. So starting off with you, Clay, I mean, heading into this event, what do you think is item number one on the list that we will learn when we make our way down there in a couple of days.
Yeah, I'm writing a preview of sorts, as you alluded to, and I have the list up to 15 things that we're going to learn. So, you can glean a lot. And first and foremost, I just love being there and seeing all the different coaches, seeing all the different teams, or players from the different teams, seeing everybody interact. You can kind of get a vibe check on a team. So I think that's kind of just number one for me. Like, we know so much about this Michigan team because they have so much returning. They rank 7th in Phil Steele's experience chart. That's first in the Big Ten. They rank 5th nationally in returning production, according to ESPN. So there's a lot there that we know about. That's kind of the big storyline heading into the year, is that this team is so loaded and so experienced. But every team's different too. I mean, 4 out of the 5 captains are going to be different this season, or 4 of the 5 captains from last year are now no longer on the team. Mike Sainer is still the only returning captain. So there's just going to be a different vibe around this team. We're going to hear about their different goals. I think we have a good idea as to what those are going to be, but just an overall vibe check on the team. And then that includes Jim Harbaugh. Just kind of something's always on his mind every time he goes down to Big Ten Media Day, whether it's what the team's goals are, how the culture is, if he's going to beat Ohio State or die trying, things like that he's going to break out. So I'm sure he's got a couple comments or mantras in his back pocket that I'm excited to hear. And that that pretty much shapes kind of some of the narratives as we head into fall camp. August 1, report date, August 2, first day of practice. So it's going to move really quickly after we get back from Big Ten Media Day. They'll get back on the field for practice, and this team will be rolling into the season.
Yeah, really quick detour, because I don't know why I didn't even put 2 and 2 together in my head. We'll talk to Blake Corum on Thursday, but you also Blake Corum was out in your neck of the woods this past weekend. So I guess real quick, what did we learn from him there, and does it shape anything you might want to know from him when we speak to him next in a few days?
Yeah, he was out near my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, at East Kentwood High School, hosting a youth camp there with Next Gen Camps, and it was packed. Over 400 kids, a lot of them wearing Corum jersey T-shirts, jerseys, as we call them. A lot of them wearing Michigan gear. The stands were packed with parents and probably just some people who wanted to just come see Blake Corum run a camp. But it was awesome. I mean, he didn't do a ton with the drills, but he did a Q&A with different, all these kids. You can kind of see in that photo there for folks watching on YouTube. Kids had their hands up. He was answering questions about his faith, about how he's motivated, his background, getting up at 4:30 in the morning every single day, working out, and then his parents driving him 2 hours to high school in Maryland just so he could be seen a little bit more by college coaches. Obviously that worked. He ends up a top 100 recruit and at Michigan. But it was cool. In terms of football stuff, he kind of reiterated what he talked about earlier in the week on a podcast. He's at 98%. He said he is down to about 212, 213 pounds. He was at 225 earlier in the offseason and has kind of shedded some of that as he's been able to run a little bit more. But he said his cutting is ridiculous, and he feels like he's back to the old Blake plus some. So Blake Corum, I mean, looks like he's fully healthy, 98%. He said the only way to get to 100 is to go through fall camp and be cutting against guys and having contact and having bodies next to him when he's running with the football. Only things you can get through actually playing football. So he's pretty much as healthy as he can be. And this Michigan team feels like it's pretty healthy going into fall camp too, which is huge. But if Blake can be the Blake he was last year, this Michigan offense is going to be dangerous no matter what else is around him. And we know that there's a lot of good stuff around him anyway.
Yeah, honing in on Blake Corum for a second. I mean, I don't know if maybe I think 2% left when you still have to take hits and make that contact. I would probably extend that percentage out a little bit because that really is the final test, is how you hold up when you take those repeated hits, because he hasn't taken a hit since he tried running the ball in that Ohio State game. So for him, yeah, that's huge. I mean, being able to, I don't know, I assume at least this is how NFL teams do it. Those first few days in camp are usually shorts, T-shirts, and helmets. I assume it'll be at least a couple days before they get out there in pads. And unfortunately, we're not given the access to watch those guys in practice. But I would love to be a fly on the wall just to see, and I assume he'll be fine. I mean, he's built for it. Obviously, he's had a huge workload over the last 2 years. I don't have a whole lot of concerns about it. if he was coming off a torn ACL or a major reconstructive surgery, then all of a sudden I think maybe you wince a little harder anytime he takes a hit. But and I'm not downplaying the significance of the injury he had, but torn meniscus, I mean, he's pretty much been on track and ahead of schedule in a lot of ways. So definitely looking forward to discussing that with him Thursday. For me personally, would love to hear more about his relationship with Donovan Edwards. And, a lot of what we've talked about lately is how their workloads will be affected while both being healthy, but trying to keep each other healthy as well, how the coaching staff will do that. So fascinating to kind of think about what we might hear from him. Because honestly, I mean, for as good as this Michigan team is, and I mean, it's full of guys that are good in front of the microphone, but every team has maybe 3 or 4 guys that are kind of must-see interviews. And I'm glad Michigan's sending 2 of those guys to this media day event. Quorum is one. Chris Jenkins is one as well. Mike Sainer still a little more soft-spoken, a little more sage-like, I would say, heading into his 5th season with the program. But I think a lot to glean from him, too, in terms of a guy who's been there a while, a guy who has had his ups and downs, but looked like a natural at the nickel last year, and excited to see maybe even a little bit more on his plate this upcoming season with him playing on the boundary. All of this is a long-winded way of me saying, spinning into something I hope to learn is I want to hear from all these guys about what they've done this offseason to stay hungry and kind of reignite that fire. Because I think when you look at what Michigan's done over these last 2 years, a lot of it is, there's a lot of things on their resume that could make you fat and happy. The 2 wins over Ohio State, the 2 Big Ten championships, to go back and try to do that a third time. I think that might be the biggest challenge that this team has faced over the last 3 years. Oh, maybe just because it's the unknown. We have the 2 years of data leading up to it, but I really am interested in talking to all 3 of those, the players that will be there, and also what Jim Harbaugh sees in terms of how his team is, because you rest on your culture, you rest on the process that got you there. But when you're trying to continue to climb the ladder as a team that can compete for a national title, how do you put what do you add or what do you switch up to put yourself over the hump? I'm really interested in hearing from those 3 guys. And again, maybe what Jim Harbaugh and the coaching staff have done to change things up a little bit and add that next level to the climb, so to speak.
That's something I had in this column that I've already written down too, is what's different. I mean, we know about the beat Georgia period in practice. First of all, I want to know what that entails. I'm sure they'll get quite a few questions about that. And it's always funny too, AB, when we park ourselves next to a Michigan player for 30 minutes or something like that. And then these national people who are bouncing around between players and coaches across the conference, you get the same question over and over. The beat Georgia period of practice, that question is going to get asked over and over. The NIL question will get asked, probably something about Northwestern. So we'll get those. I like kind of predicting what some of those are. I think I might be spot on with those. But yeah, what's different about this team? What the culture is kind of shaping into? Because as Jim Harbaugh said when we talked to him at Wayne State earlier in June at that satellite camp, he said a lot can happen over the summer, and that's true in that a lot of guys will emerge. Different guys will position themselves well coming into fall camp, or maybe a guy makes a move on the depth chart, maybe somebody else falls behind. And that can probably be pretty apparent in those first few days of fall camp. But it's also true in that these are player-led workouts. These are player-led practices. They get to see Ben Herbert a lot, but beyond that, it's the players taking the lead. I was at in East Grand Rapids last year for one of those player-led practices. We just got word that they were out there, and I was in town, and it was on their team trip. And you could tell who the leaders were, who the most vocal guys were on that team. So it's the same things happening right now, just inside Schembechler Hall and, at Glick Fieldhouse and everything like that. So we will be able to kind of tell what the identity of this team is, I think, from talking to some of these guys. And Chris Jenkins, I think, is going to be the best quote down there. The other guys are a little more calculated, and Chris is a super smart guy, obviously, but he likes to have a little bit more fun. He's a little more loose. He'll sling it a little bit. So I'm excited to hear from Chris Jenkins, because you feel like you're always getting the truth when you're talking to Chris Jenkins and all these guys, but he's a lot of fun to be around.
I'll take your pulse on this really quick. Those three guys that they're sending, Chris Jenkins, Blake Corum, Mike Sainristil. I don't know how many captains they're going to have. I could see it being 4 or 5, but those three feel like locks to me, right?
They have to be. I mean, Mikey, I don't even know if they'll vote on him because I think Ronnie Bell said last year he was sitting to the side because he knew he was going to be a 2-time, a captain again. But I mean, Chris Jenkins, I'd be shocked if he weren't a captain, and I would be absolutely shocked if Blake wasn't a captain. And then there are a number of guys as we've talked about this offseason that could join them. I mean, a few guys on the offensive line. You could see if you go with juniors, which it's usually been seniors and fifth-year guys, but I mean, I could see a Rod Moore. I could see J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. So there are a bunch of different leaders on this team, but I think those three are locks. I agree with you.
Something that's interesting to me is, the reason one of my bigger questions about this team is that special teams unit, just because you lose guys like Jake Moody and Brad Robbins. And, those guys had played so much football at Michigan and seen so much that, basically when it comes to the later stages of their careers, they're basically kind of running their own practices. And something I thought about when you brought up the player-led practices that you saw last year is that I think you have that experience at almost every position group now, to where, we talk, the elephant in the room, obviously, is that a lot of these guys probably won't be around for next year. But, in the here and now, when you ask what's different, I feel like, these assistant coaches, Jim Harbaugh, they're going to give these guys all the resources they need to keep doing what they have done. But I almost feel like the biggest difference this year might be that, it is coming more from a player-led perspective, because the improvements that they're going to make this year are on the margins. And the only way to do that is to kind of take it upon yourself, hone in on those details. And, like I said, you've got upperclassmen and graduate guys. And, in Mike Barrett's case, you've got a 6-year guy in one of your position group rooms. So I feel like that's probably a storyline that, as we, on the drive down, we're thinking of things that, the angles we want to hit. I think for me, that's the one that stands out to me is what does that player-led leadership look like and how has it changed? But let's move to the other side of the coin here. There are things that, Jim Harbaugh, we love when he takes the microphone for an extended period of time. There's going to be that viral quote, and the beat writers will scramble really quick to tweet it out, right, and get their retweets or their X's if that's in place.
You're acting like you're separating us from the rest of the pack here.
Well, no, I'm speaking from my own experience of what my priorities typically have been in the past. But he's going to have that viral quote, but he's also not going to give away the nuclear launch codes. We're not going to hear, what type of plays they're going to put in for J.J. McCarthy. We're not going to hear, what the workload split is going to be between Corum and Edwards. There's a lot of things that we're not going to find out from this event on Thursday. So from your perspective, what are some of those things that you expect to not only not learn Thursday, but maybe we don't really know until the regular season starts?
It's kind of hard to say because it just depends on what kind of mood Jim Harbaugh is in for the most part. Sometimes he's a little looser with health updates, injuries and everything like that. Sometimes he doesn't want to talk about it at all and says he doesn't discuss injuries, even though he did the week before. Things like that. So that part's going to be interesting, although we do believe that this is a pretty healthy team heading into fall camp, as we mentioned earlier. But I think one of the things that Harbaugh likes to avoid a lot is how things have changed, or comparing to last year or the year before or past seasons. I remember even being at Nebraska in 2021, and Cade McNamara was just at the podium saying, this program doesn't win this game. My freshman year, this program would not have won this game last season. And then Harbaugh's asked about the same thing, and he's like, I think we might have, won this a few years ago. He doesn't like to put down the past teams, that sort of thing. So long-winded way of saying, I think comparisons are out of the question. I don't think we're going to get any comparisons. And with that, I don't think we're going to get much on Sharon Moore, the offense, maybe what's going to change there with him as the sole offensive coordinator. We heard that Matt Weiss last year was heavily involved with red zone and with third downs. So Sherrod Moore adding that to his plate in addition to being the offensive line coach. I think we'll hear about how he's doing in that role. And Jim Harbaugh is, has nothing but glowing things to say about Sherrod Moore every time he talks about him. But I don't know that we're going to get specifics on exactly what's going to change with this offense. Maybe some of the intricacies of the defense as well that he's not going to touch on. But as I remember talking about with you last year coming out of this event, was sometimes it's not what they say, it's how they say different things. And you can kind of read between the lines. So we will definitely be doing that, even though we won't get all the answers from Jim Harbaugh and these players this week.
Yeah, and the other thing, speaking of the viral quote, or a lot of times when you go to these media type of events, the media days, or where there's a lot of people from different spheres converging on one place, there's always going to be at least a couple people that are searching for that viral soundbite. And, someone's going to ask about the Matt Weiss stuff. Someone's going to ask about Shemi Schembechler. And I think you'll just kind of get a canned answer out of that. I'd be surprised if you got anything more than that. That came to mind in terms of things we won't learn more about. But other than that, yeah, you're totally right. It depends on the mood that he's in. I mean, gosh, when we talked to him at Wayne State, we damn near talked him into letting us in a practice during fall camp, which is absolutely not going to happen. But it depends on the mood. Some days he is like the mayor up there. In other days he's the bump on the log. And but I think typically, I've only been to 2 of these media day events. I think typically he's pretty outspoken and pretty, relatively speaking, transparent at these type of events. Mostly because I think he feels the same, kind of like the way that I described, where, you get there, it's like, it's the first time you've seen a lot of people in several months, or, football's right around, once you go to that event, it means that football's right around the corner. So, from my perspective, I can't think of a time, he's probably going to be more of his, the curmudgeon-y version of himself when, it's Indiana week and, he's just trying to get through a game week. We're just trying to get through those types of game weeks. But yeah, I expect him to be in a relatively good mood for that. But any other lingering thoughts about what we might learn, what we might not learn from this event? There's a lot of ground to cover, but at the same time, this is by and large a known commodity as it pertains to the football team.
Yeah, I got quite a few more things, and again, I'm writing about this, so I'm not going to give it all away, and people can head to the Wolverine.com for it. But I think there's quite a bit that we can learn about the transfers that we haven't seen yet. So they brought in 9 transfers this offseason, but we only saw 4 or 5 of them in the spring game. There are some key pieces that we haven't seen suit up in a Michigan uniform yet. Drake Nugent, Miles Hinton, Ladarius Henderson on the offensive line, Josh Wallace, who arrived just last month from UMass at the cornerback spot, and then James Turner, kicker from Louisville. So those guys are potentially all going to impact, in one way or the other this season, as will the other transfers that will continue to, show different things this offseason that we haven't seen and we can hear about this week. But I want to hear how things will play out on the offensive line. I think that plays right into, the transfer talk, because you're probably going to have at least 2 starters on the offensive line that transferred in this offseason. So I want to hear about the pass rush, who's emerging there, the cornerback situation, which, we've kind of talked about a lot this offseason because it was a big question mark. And Michigan admitted it with its actions by pursuing quite a few corners in the transfer portal and eventually landing Josh Wallace. But, who stepped up there? Is Will Johnson going to be ready for game 1? If not, who are your guys? And, I think Mike Sainristil still will be able to shed some light on that, what his role is going to be at the nickel spot and playing some at corner. So I think we're going to be able to get a decent amount of info about this team this week. And it'll just make me even more excited about the season that's to come. It always kind of Big Ten Media Days, the unofficial kickoff. And then we kind of realize, okay, there are 4 or 5 weeks until the season. So, things calm down, but it just makes you want the season to start right away.
Yeah, it's this weird sensation of, you're like, holy crap, we're at Media Days. That means like the summer's over. It's time to dive into fall camp and your brain kind of goes, at least mine does, goes to almost like the Sunday scaries mode. But then you kind of get back, you write your stories, and then we still have our weekends for a couple weeks, which is great. Weather's been awesome in the state of Michigan. Happy to be outside and enjoy some of that. But we still have time, but it's where the talking points and the social media discussion, the message board discussion, the months worth of these podcasts we've done between spring football, it's where we start to answer some of those questions. And that's exciting. Like I said, I still hope, fingers crossed, one day we at least get some kind of open practice, or they let us sit in the stands for, an open practice for the fans, whatever it is. I'm excited to see. Like I said, a lot of my questions about this team are kind of on the margins, but excited to see how those add up. There's not quite as much juice, I would say, heading into this fall camp, only because you don't have a quarterback battle. And that's, anytime you have that in any team, no matter what the stakes are, that's usually by and large the biggest storyline. But, excited to see where the improvements have come from, because, April was, by the time they start fall camp, that was 4 months ago. So we'll see what happens there. But all right, well, let's move into, I want to do a quick read for our friends over at Rogue Shop, our second sponsor of the Monday night shows here on the Wolverines YouTube channel. Head over to rogueshop.com if you have issues sleeping, chronic pain, and or anxiety or stress. I check a few of those boxes. You can figure out which ones for yourself, but use promo code the Wolverine for 10% off your order over at rogueshop.com. Rogue Shop sells CBD, THC, edibles, tinctures, smokables, bath salts, pain creams, topicals, vapes, candles, soaps. They handcraft all of their own products, the topicals, soaps, candles, you name it, all the things that I've just named. You know what the products are at this point. We've been singing their praises dating back to last football season. They grow their own cannabis in their own manufacturing facility. All of their products are made with their own stuff. The website has a 24/7 chat function where customers can ask anything. All of their edibles are custom formulated with cannabis, vitamins, and plant materials. Rogue Shop is America's #1 online dispensary and health and wellness shop. They are a true small business and disabled veteran owned, and they operate out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So consider supporting our friends that operate out of Big Ten country. We love our friends here in the Midwest. So that's rogueshop.com. Use promo code the Wolverine for 10% off your order. Rogueshop.com, ROGUE shop.com. Promo code the Wolverine for 10% off your order today. All right, I want to move back into media days really quick. And this can be, I don't know if it's going to be rapid fire. It's going to be basically whatever direction we take it. But something I wanted to do is take the 3 players that we will speak to this week, Blake Corum, Chris Jenkins, and Mike Sainristil, and run through maybe our biggest question or biggest storyline with each player heading into the 2023 season. So we'll start up front with Blake Corum. I think we sort of hit on it in segment 1. But for me, Clayton, I think it's by and large, what is that workload going to look like? And, if he's the hot hand, is it going to be a true backfield split? I think a lot of people have it in their brains that, if all things are equal, those guys are going to be 50-50 with him and Edwards. And maybe it skews a little more towards Corum if he's healthy. But, when push comes to shove, I think that Blake Corum is still probably your guy if someone needs to get 25, 28, 30 carries in a game.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. So to me, I agree. It's not just workload in terms of those two, splitting carries or whatever, but it's just kind of what this offense is going to look like. And I know Jim Harbaugh, too, will be asked quite a bit about his prediction that things will be close to 50-50 run pass. Now I got an ad that pops up on my screen. So hopefully that didn't come through. But, yeah, are they going to pass more? Do they feel like Blake Corum's going to be that bell cow again? I would assume it's going to be. I was kind of shaking my head there as you were talking about it, because I think it's just going to end up that way because he's going to demand it by how well he plays, just like he did last season. There were times they probably didn't want to have to hand it to him 29 times per game when he was healthy in Big Ten games. Was looking that up the other day. That's a lot. But at the same time, he was so damn good that they had to, and they had to move the ball to score points. And that's pretty much the goal of offense, as I'm sure Jim Harbaugh will probably say, as he often does. So that's going to be interesting to me to get his viewpoint on it. I'm sure he'll be asked about if his thoughts have changed on if he wants to be that type of workhorse. Last year he said he'll take as many carries as he can possibly get, and that's the type of kid he is. He wants to do whatever he can to help the team. So I wonder after the injury if his view on that has changed. I doubt it. And I didn't have enough time with him the other day to ask him that, so we'll have more opportunity to do that this week. But that's kind of my thought with him, is just what's this offense going to look like in terms of throwing the ball more, if they're going to have to lean on him as much. But again, going back to, Blake being that guy that they continue to pound the rock with, I mean, it goes back to what somebody close to the program told me last year, and I've referenced it on the podcast before, but Blake Corum is literally the most trustworthy person or player in that program, from the habits of going to class. He never misses class. He never misses a workout. He's never late to anything. And, you can't say that about every single guy. Then when you give him the ball in the game, he delivers, just about every single time. It's just too hard not to put a lot on his plate. So I think we're going to see him have obviously a massive role again this year. But that's always been in the back of my head since I heard that. And I think it's going to be the case again this season. And it's not to say Donovan Edwards won't have a great year, won't have a big role, but I do think we'll see Blake as that guy. But I want to hear him talk about it as well. I agree with you.
Something else I'd like to know, and I assume if we were to ask Blake about this, that he would give, he'd give us that smile, exactly the look I'm talking about. And he'd say, I guess you just have to wait and see. But I almost wonder too, I mean, he caught 24 passes in 2021, and that was down to 11 last year. But, I wonder, with the mileage he has on him, and knowing that, I mean, let's just, I hate to say it, but the NFL is going to kind of knock him for, one, coming back to school, but two, the workload and his size. And they will look for every reason to not draft him in the, or day 2 or maybe in the middle rounds. But I almost wonder if Michigan might explore kind of reintegrating him in the pass game as well. Because if you have two backs, and again, I'm not saying that he's, Donovan Edwards is basically a slot receiver playing running back. But if you have two backs that are a threat to catch the football and can do so at any time, what does that do to your offense, especially when they're on the field at the same time? And again, they're not going to divulge, like I call them the nuclear launch codes. They're not going to divulge anything like that. But, I sit back and I look at, you just look at how can this team be more dangerous, be more versatile. I wonder if that's something that they wind up exploring, Clay.
Yeah, potentially. I think the reason why he had 24 in 2021 and only 11 last year is just because of the role he was in, a little bit more in on third downs. Hassan Haskins was kind of the workhorse, that sort of thing. And then last year when Donovan Edwards was healthy, they were able to sprinkle him in. I don't think it'll change a ton, but I do think they can get him involved more in the screen game, which is actually we saw a little bit more in that Illinois game, which he ends up getting hurt. But he had a huge gain on a screen pass, and I think that's something that they could use a little bit more, and maybe they will with a different play calling setup. But that'll be interesting too, how they use each guy. But I do think that it's going to be pretty similar to last year. I just don't think it'll average out to 29 a game in Big Ten games when he's healthy. I think that's a little bit too much. It'll just naturally happen with the pass game progressing like we expect it to. So 24, 25, I don't know. And then Donovan Edwards gets the ball too, but we'll see kind of how that plays out.
All right, I want to move to Chris Jenkins now. Something that I'd like to know about him, Clayton. And again, it's one of those things we're just not going to know until he gets on the field. But one, every time we talk to Chris, we have to ask. Usually it's not proper to ask someone about their weight, but this is a special football exception where probably ask where he's at weight wise, what his nutrition plan has looked like. And for him, Chris Jenkins is a guy that, a lot of what he does not show up in a box score. But I really think what Michigan's going to need a little more on the stat, or a lot more on the stat sheet for him. I'd say in terms of quarterback pressures from the interior. You'd like to see him stuff the run. You'd like to see him maybe rack up a few sacks. I truly believe that he has a chance to be Michigan's most disruptive interior defensive lineman since Maurice Hurst. And again, that's not something that we can really we can gauge by what he says at media day. But from his perspective, I'd like to know a little more. The weight stuff is fine, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what the emphasis has been for him this offseason when it comes to kind of the twitchy stuff, the stuff you do in a phone booth, so to speak, in terms of the lateral movement, the explosiveness, those types of things.
I agree. He talked about it basically as soon as the season ended last year, how he and the defensive line, all those guys, especially the interior guys, are obsessing over pass rush. I remember asking him about it in the spring, and he talked about how it was coming along, how some of those guys were progressing, how he was getting better as a pass rusher. I think that's going to be really important. I think it's something they lacked last season. I mean, Mozzie Smith was fantastic at the nose spot. He was basically just a run stuffer, and that's really what they needed from him. But Jenkins didn't get as much pass rush. Now, he did have some really big pressures, including against Ohio State. He draws a hold, that sort of stuff. But maybe they didn't get it as consistently as they needed to. So I agree. I think it's going to be the pass rush. He was great against the run last year. I think he led all defensive tackles in the country in run stops. But how are they going to get after the passer when you don't have an elite pass rusher? And maybe they do, right? We just don't know yet that there's a proven guy there. In fact, we know there's not a proven guy there. So that's going to be a big storyline, I think, for Chris Jenkins and his weight. I mean, I'm just glad he doesn't ask it back to us or to me. But yeah, you always got to get a weight out of Chris Jenkins because he just continues to gain and gain. He was up to 309 when he tweeted something a month or two ago. So I assume he's probably in that window there. But I think him and Abigail O'Connor and Ben Herbert are pretty much best friends at this point because nobody works harder at reaching his goals in that area than Chris Jenkins.
Yeah, and again, I mean, the shine is still maybe not as bright as it should be for that. Obviously, Ben Herbert has gotten his due, but that nutrition staff, I mean, food is fuel, and food, gives you the energy to do these workouts and can kind of unlock what you're able to do to your physique and those types of things. So again, shout out to the nutrition staff at Michigan. Maybe that's another angle to work. I mean, all of those guys have benefited from that in their own way. So moving to Mike Sainristil now. For me, it's pretty simple. Mike, are you ready and able to play a little boundary corner if you need to this year? He played almost exclusively in the slot last season. I actually believe it was exclusively in the slot. As we said earlier, he looked ready to go from that perspective, like right out of the box. Like there wasn't the adjustment period. He looked like a natural there. And now, Amorian Walker is going to battle for that number 2 cornerback job. Josh Wallace will, Miles Pollard will, Jaden McBurrows will. You have all these guys that'll compete for that. And I think that the best version of Michigan's defense has Mike Sainristil playing the nickel. But, there could be certain, looks that you throw out there where maybe Mikey's on the boundary and Zeke Berry's playing the nickel or something different in that back seven. So for me, especially when these guys come back, they come back for unfinished business, but a lot of them come back for player development and to kind of, add a little more to their toolkit before they try their hand at the NFL next spring. So for Mike Sainristil, to me, it's what more. We know he's willing to put whatever's on his plate, but what more has been or will be put on his plate this season?
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned it too. I mean, that's why he came back, was for year 2 of being on defense, not just showing it 1 year. And let's be honest, I'm not sure he gets drafted this spring if he would have come out anyway, but he's fantastic to have, back and as a leader on that defense. So I'm with you. What's the next step for Mike Sainristil? What does year 2 of Mike Sainristil as a defensive player look like? And it'll probably look like him playing a little bit at corner, somebody else sliding into nickel, as you talked about, and him just being a better nickel too. He was very good last season, but there were some times where he got burned. So he's going to improve as well. So I want to hear about how much more comfortable he is there, how Amorian Walker is coming along because he's mentoring him as he made the switch from wide receiver. So, and then also just leadership too. I mean, Mike Sainristil still has been around a long time now, entering his 5th season. He's seen a lot of different teams, a lot of different dynamics, a few different, types of cultures and a culture change. So I want to get his perspective. Jim Harbaugh doesn't necessarily compare to past teams, but some of the players do. And Mike Sainristil always has good thoughts on how things have changed and where things are headed. So I'm excited to hear from him on that.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, the play, his pass breakup in that Ohio State game, I mean, even if it was just a linear development or just a little better each week, I mean, to me, that's as good a play as you can make, given the game it was in, given the stakes, given what was on the line, given
Unreal. Yeah.
the fact that it was a guy who was maybe a good 5 or 6 inches taller than him too. To me, maybe a top 2 or 3 play from last season. I forget where I ranked it in our football preview, which, by the way, football preview has been out. It's in the wild. Head over to the WolverineOnDemand.com to order your copy of that. There's also the digital version available as well. I had to sneak that little shout out in there. But before we move into questions, we have a few to take, and then I actually have one for you before we close out the show. Any other lingering thoughts about Media Day, or I'm kind of bummed out. They keep splitting Michigan up from Ohio State and Michigan State. But then again, it kind of cuts down on some of the stupid questions that Jim Harbaugh and Michigan players have gotten traditionally from kind of the lunatic fringe of those beats over the last few years. But there's not we'll go do the Michigan thing Thursday, but there's not really a ton of juice in that group as far as I'm concerned. I think Luke Fickell is Thursday as well.
Yeah, but Fickell and Matt Rule, and they will be the 2 leading into Jim Harbaugh at the podium, I believe, early on in the day. So that'll be interesting. And I don't think it is going to cut down on the dumb questions that he'll be asked, because those dudes stick around from those beats.
For 2 nights.
I remember
hotels love those beats.
Yeah, maybe one. I mean, I don't know. I know St. Elmo's doesn't love the Ohio State people, but no, they stick around. They get there the day before, even though their team is the next day. I remember that, like 2 years ago, Michigan, Ohio State, they were split up. We're in line behind the entire Ohio State beat, even though their team didn't go the next day. They're the first ones in line. They're ready to go. I think we talked about this last week. They had their questions written down for Jim Harbaugh. So you got that. I'm excited to see what he has to come back at them with. And that's always kind of fun too. We had the no comment heard around the world last year when Harbaugh was asked about the third base comment about Ryan Day from the previous November. And that was fun. So we'll have a moment like that where we could potentially go viral with the clip. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But excited to kind of get there. It's kind of, I won't say the linchpin event of the summer, but it's like first day of orientation, first day of school, and I've described it several times at this point. But all right, well, let's move into some of these questions, or at least comments from throughout the show. P. Maximus says that they showed the TCU Michigan game again on ESPN last night. I really studied the game, and man, our defense looked bad, giving up big plays and a lot of yards on the ground to their backup running back. So again, as we talk about how do you find ways to motivate yourself, we've talked about this before too. Michigan, won't say slacked off on defense in that game, but by far their worst performance of last season. And they didn't really come out of the locker room and make the big adjustment. TCU kept scoring, and 1 or 2 more stops, and maybe Michigan's playing for a national title that next week.
Yeah, it was kind of the opposite script of the entire season. They played well in that first half. That Michigan defense really did. Just the second half, it just fell apart. And, maybe, I rewatched the game recently, actually, too, a couple weeks ago. And, maybe the writing was on the wall a little bit, because some of their biggest plays in that first half, they had to bring a lot of pressure. And then the second half, they continued to do that. Jesse Minter bringing some heat. And Max Duggan was just good enough. He wasn't fantastic in that game, but he was just good enough at getting the ball out, even when guys were running right at him, and that defensive backfield just didn't have the bodies back there when you had to send extra guys to blitz, and rush the passers. So that's something I want to hear about. That ties right in with the storyline of Big Ten Media Day is, are they going to be able to get pressure with 4 up front, maybe 5, and, and when you're playing some of those better teams on the schedule, you have to be able to do it. And that's kind of what college football has become as it's become more pass happy. So that is going to be huge. And I agree with that comment there.
All right, we'll go to Dylan Girk, who wants to know, what is the Beat Georgia drill? So, Clayton, would you like to revisit that one for those who are not aware?
I actually think Dylan's question came through when we were talking about what we don't know, or what we're not going to find out at Big Ten Media Day. But that's something we're going to try to find out for sure. I don't think we know at this point. I'm not sure it's an exact drill per se, but just a period of practice that maybe they turn the music up like they do for the Beat Ohio drill and some extra juice in there. But I'm excited to hear about it. I think the players and Jim Harbaugh probably know those questions are coming, and if they want to divulge, then they will. If not, then they will probably refrain from it. But they are going to get asked one way or the other. I can tell you that.
Yeah, there will be, and again, this is why you have media and PR training. There will be some prep for things that you might get asked. So we'll see what those answers wind up being and who's candid about it and who isn't. So Theodore Dodge has a few where he says, has anyone heard if Ladarius Henderson has arrived in Ann Arbor? How does he look? Well, I don't know that we could say we know how he looks. I mean, he didn't participate in spring ball and they haven't started camp yet. But again, I think he's on, I would assume he's on track to be with the team for fall camp. It's something that certainly we'll discuss with Jim Harbaugh during his media session on Thursday. But yeah, I think that things are pretty much good to go there. And that as we start camp here in a week or so, I think I would have him penciled in as maybe as your starter at left tackle.
Yeah, so he did arrive June 1. And actually, from what we had heard, he was in Ann Arbor before that, taking the rest of his classes for Arizona State online. So he's gotten to know these guys and gel with those guys too, even though he wasn't technically on the team in the spring. So I agree. I think he'll probably be your left tackle, but I did name him one of the players with the biggest shoes to fill coming into fall camp because, Ryan Hayes was probably a bit underrated here. That was a big piece of the offensive line the last 3-4 seasons at the left tackle spot. And he did a pretty darn good job. Maybe not, he was a 7th rounder, so he definitely wasn't a 1st rounder, but maybe wasn't one of those elite guys, 1st round type talents, but he was steady. He did a really good job in there. And Ladarius Henderson has to prove himself in fall camp. So, and I'm sure he's been doing that throughout the summer, but I think anything we've heard has been positive, but you got to do it when the pads come on. As Jim Harbaugh says, that's when you separate the men from the t-shirts.
I love that quote. Yeah. Interesting point on Ryan Hayes. I mean, again, going back to football preview and things we worked on for that, part of the 2018 class review was ranking the top 5 players. And, obviously Aiden Hutchinson's number 1 with a bullet. Jake Moody's in there. Hassan Haskins is in there. Ronnie Bell is in there. But there had to be a 5th. And Ryan Hayes was that guy. He was obviously doesn't leave the program with the accolades that some of those other guys had. But he was, I think, mostly consistent at left tackle. He was a big part of a group that won back-to-back Joe Moore awards. 2-time All Big Ten performer. That's if you have you've got you think you've got a bird in hand with one of Carson Barnhart, Trente Jones, or Ladarius Henderson to fill that role. But I would agree with you in that he was probably a little bit underrated. So we'll see what happens. I think that's this offensive line, I expect it to be good, but I can see there being a little bit of a drop off. And chances are if you had to pick Michigan or the field to win the Joe Moore Award, I'd probably take the field, honestly, because we still have some question marks there. But that doesn't mean they won't be good. And maybe if they don't win that award, we talk about what's the push to get yourself past where they've been. Maybe that lights a fire under them because the last 2 college football playoff games that they've played in are probably the 2 worst offensive line performances of the last 2 seasons. So,
no doubt.
Something to think about there.
No doubt. I literally just wrote about this in the article drop while this podcast was going. We are able to schedule these things out for the, in little inside baseball for the listener. But I talked to Phil Steele, who's on the Joe Moore Award committee, and he has Michigan coming in as his number 2 offensive line entering the season. But he did say he was disappointed by the last 2 bowl games. Now they hand out the Joe Moore Award to the best offensive line before the bowl game, so it doesn't really take it into account. But that committee is going to have that in the back of their head. And I mean, let's be honest too. You look at some of these lines like Georgia and Alabama with first rounders and second rounders and third rounders. They probably weren't the best offensive line in the country the last couple seasons, although they were great. And they were, and they played extremely well together, which is a credit to not only them, but Sharon Moore as their position coach. But I don't know. I don't think they're going to win a third in a row. The committee's going to have that in the back of their mind. But as I wrote and as you just said, not winning that award doesn't mean you don't have a good offensive line. And maybe they need that chip on their shoulder heading into a potential playoff game or their bowl game. So it's really irrelevant, and maybe it'll end up being to their benefit if they don't win the Joe Moore Award.
Let me ask you this. This wasn't the question I was going to ask, but it just popped into my head. Push comes to shove. You got what has a better chance of happening? A third straight Joe Moore Award or a third straight Big Ten championship?
Third straight Big Ten championship. I think it's, there's just more out there for the committee to pick. There's only 14 teams in the Big Ten. There are only really 3 teams that can win it, maybe 4. So I'm going to say Big Ten championship for sure. And I don't think they're going to get a third. Like I said, I just don't think, although that is a big trophy that they probably don't want to move, they're probably putting that off. I would too if I was in charge of that, because it's massive and it's sitting right there in Michigan's weight room. But it's a national award. They're going to want to move it around. So there's just no way, in my opinion. Not no way, but low chance, lower.
I get that. Just was curious. Back to Theodore Dodge. Oh, what do I think?
Better chance.
Theodore's question, I would say it's a Big Ten title because I think there are the less variables in that.
I agree.
It's kind of like that's more.
You
of
can
an
control
Ohio
that
State.
too.
That's more of like an Ohio State versus Penn State thing, as opposed to versus Georgia and 4 other schools from the SEC and take your pick there. So yeah, exactly. I could see that. Just popped into my head. I didn't workshop it. That's why we do these things live. So Theodore also asked, also curious who the backup QB will be, but I suspect we may not know until the ECU game. I would agree with that, and would also say that I bet it changes throughout the year. I bet 1 week maybe Jack Tuttle has the better week of practice, and the other week Davis Warren steps up, has a better week of practice. Now, again, if you're having the conversation of building equity in the future, I certainly think if JJ McCarthy's not back next year, Davis Warren's probably competing for your starting quarterback job, unless you hit the transfer portal, or unless Lord willing Jaden Davis comes in and lights the world on fire right away. Which I like him. I don't know that that's going to happen though. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know who the backup quarterback's going to be. I don't think Michigan knows who their backup quarterback's going to be. And I would also say don't sleep on Alex Orji.
I agree. I was going to say, I think we may not even know in that ECU game. We'll probably have some sort of pecking order, but I could see Orji coming in, for his package, and it may look like he's number 2. But then if, God forbid, JJ got hurt and somebody else had to start a game, maybe you go with Tuttle, who has the more experience, or Davis Warren, who's a little bit more of a thrower. Not that Alex Orji can't throw the football, but so it's going to be probably something that changes, as you said, and it could be situational too. We gotta factor that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move to Mike G, who says, Broomer, Clayton, yes, we want to beat Ohio State, but given what happened after the MSU game, don't you want to beat Sparty 92-0? Let me just, full disclosure, I would like Michigan to beat every team by that much, because that makes post-game a lot easier. It means the game story is written by the halfway through the third quarter. It means, we can start talking game balls at some point in the third quarter. It makes everything is easier when Michigan takes care of its business. As it pertains to the Michigan State Spartans, Yeah, I mean, you want to blow them out and beat them as badly as you can in their home building. And the best thing you could do in that scenario, given what happened last year, given the toxicity in the rivalry, you beat them, you drop the mic, you walk off the field, and that's it. And all that there is, the only thing that's left to be said for evidence of what happened is what's in that box score at the end of the game. We don't need the extracurricular stuff. I don't know why I can't say that word today.
Well, you know who started the extracurricular stuff was Mark D'Antonio and his team parading the trophy, which was a locker room trophy for many years around the big house on the field. So if you win, best believe I think Michigan is going to be stomping on that Spartan logo, like, you know, maybe not quite like Devin Bush, but they have the right to parade it around that stadium. And I do love the 92-0, Mike, by the way, prediction, because that means they go for 2. I was just doing some quick math, you know, looking at some multiples of 7, and so well done. I agree. 92, maybe 93-0.
I forgot about parading the trophy around the field. Like that, absolutely.
You got to do that,
but forgot about that. I don't know. It's just so much of this rivalry has just become just me blocking stuff out because for the good of my mental health, honestly.
Well, and when you play Michigan State, you know, you're safer on the field against them than you are in the tunnel. So parade it around the field all you want.
Yeah, stay out there as long as you can, I suppose. We will take one more. And I haven't seen this comment, so maybe Clay, you can fill me in on this. Bruce McGraw asks, what's your opinion on Joel Klatt's comments about Michigan upsetting OSU if they played 10 times? Michigan may win 3 or 4 out of the 10. Is this in reference to last year's game or this year's game?
I think both. Or yeah, the last 2 with Michigan winning. He made this comment a while back, but I saw it resurface on social media recently. I mean, they did upset Ohio State in both games. They were 8-point underdogs this past fall in Columbus. So I kind of agree with him there, and I agree with him with the standpoint that Michigan played not above its head, but that was as good of a performance as you could have had, and Ohio State, you know, just kind of didn't play all that well by their standards. So I see it as an upset. I don't know about, you know, only winning 3 or 4 out of 10. I think it's closer to 50-50, but I see what he's kind of saying there, and, you know, but at the same time, I think Michigan will probably be favored by the time this game is played this fall.
I think so. Michigan earned both wins. I don't think there was a whole lot that was fluky about it.
No.
If you want to argue that what Michigan did last year without Blake Corum, if you're saying how many times does Michigan win without Blake Corum, I would say maybe 3 or 4 out of the 10. Like I don't think that's a super hot take, but I also said last year that, you know, I was the only one. Again, I'll pat myself on the back for this because I can do it for.
You deserve it.
Whatever, 100 more days or whatever it was. I was the only one to pick Michigan over Ohio State. And I said, if you got them into a 4-quarter game, they were going to fold. And they did. And that's something that we've seen the last 2 years. So to me, there hasn't been a whole lot fluky about it. I actually think, you know, as we go back and look through things historically, I actually think the 2021 game was probably a little closer than we'd give it credit for. But last year's should have been what? What's the math on that? 52-23, if not for the pity whistle late in the game. So for me, I mean, I think that, in any good rivalry, when you have 2 teams that are that good and that talented, yeah, it probably is closer to 50-50 or a coin flip. And it skews a little more towards the home team, whoever it winds up being. So if you want to say last year's game or the game between last year's 2 teams is maybe Michigan wins 3 or 4 times out of the 10, that's fine. I mean, lest we forget, this was an Ohio State team that took Georgia literally down to the last kick. So there's the duality of that too. But yeah, I don't think it's that hot of a take by Joel, but it doesn't really, I don't think that serves as motivation. I mean, you just go out there and you beat them again because it's important to keep doing that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point, is that Michigan was the tougher team, was the better team in those games. You only play once. Same thing going back to the 90s when Ohio State was probably more talented and potentially you could say better, but in that matchup, Michigan had their number. Michigan has had their number the last two. So I don't think it's not knocking either of those wins. And I did watch the clip, but it's been several weeks since he said it, but I don't think he was knocking Michigan's wins. I think he was just more so talking about how Ohio State is still here and they're still a national title contender despite not being able to beat Michigan the last 2 years.
Yeah. And this is the last year where really those type of debates are even really going to carry a lot of water because with the 12-team playoff, those two teams are getting in regardless, and they got in regardless last year anyways. And I think it still stands.
And they're probably going to play a couple times.
Yeah. I mean, they could play in this new configuration coming next year. They could play Ohio State could play 3 times feasibly. It's possible as it moves closer and closer to professional football feeling, which, again, we have our qualms about, but it could happen. We have to take things for as they are, not as, the way we'd like them to be. This is truly the last question because it's a $5 super chat from our friend Shab Fan, who I had the great, not only pleasure of meeting in Traverse City, but also breaking bread together at the same table at Grand Traverse Resort. So hello, Shab Fan. He says, curious if you think being on the NCAA 2024 video game might motivate some players to stay another year. It might sound petty, but this is a unique opportunity. I don't know. I doubt it, only because, and again, we'll see what winds up happening with the payout that these guys get for their likenesses. I know the Brander Group was not happy with the proposed $500 a player, but if the number stays in that range, I don't think guys are coming back just to be in a video game.
No.
So, no, I don't see that happening. I am so excited for this game to happen because I will not be able to put it down. I'm very happy they're not just reskinning Madden and putting it out there. They've been building this game from the ground up. It sounds like it's going to have everything that I loved about the last iteration of the game that Denard Robinson was on the cover of. But it is a unique opportunity, but you can also, there are going to be, I'm sure there will be roster files where, if these likenesses don't show up in the game, you'll be able to get them in there regardless anyway. So I don't know that that's going to be a huge motivating factor unless, I could see, again, not to go off on a tangent. I think the only way, and it won't have anything to do with the video game, but like a guy like JJ McCarthy could feasibly come back to school and they say, we're going to put you on the cover. And that's going to be more than $500. He's going to get the full, kit and caboodle in terms of what that payout might look like, being the face of the game. But I don't see it affecting guys coming back to school or not.
I agree.
So, yeah. And Shabfam also says he'll be at the Bowling Green game. Excited for the new scoreboard and lights. I am as well. Excited to see what that all looks like. Sounds like work is almost complete ahead of the September 2nd opener. So, well, we went a little bit overtime this week, Clayton, but a lot of ground to cover and was happy to do so. Again, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You're going to have a lot, podcast schedule or live show schedule will stay the same. Coming up very soon, you'll get the shows after these football games on Saturdays. You'll get Ballas and Skeen on Sunday nights. You're going to have a ton of videos coming from Big Ten Media Days. We'll have the video of Harbaugh. We'll have video of the players. So yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. You'll get that stuff. The alerts will go right to your pocket when those videos get posted. So be sure to do that. Most people, I don't know what the stats are, but most people will just watch these videos and not subscribe. Super easy to do. Just click that button below while it's on your mind while I'm saying it. But so be sure to check that out. Be sure to subscribe to the Wolverine. All those pertinent details are below. Get yourself a copy of the football preview as well over at thewolverineondemand.com. So that's going to do it for us. For Clayton Safey, I'm Anthony Broom. We'll talk to you again very shortly after we get back from Indianapolis and Big Ten Media Days. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon.